So when we're working with 360 footage or animations, we need to conform to a certain grid. So what I've already done is I've already found a equitangular grid. Again, I might be butchering the name of that, but hey ho. So I'm just going to drag this grid onto my composition. I'm just going to turn the transparency off. So what you should see on screen now is this grid here. I'm just going to scale this till it fits my composition. And what we have here is essentially our 360 view, but kind of as a grid essentially. Now one thing that is missing on this grid is it's not very obvious, but this bottom here and this top here is actually quite squashed. And these middle spheres here represent the kind of camera perspective, or in this case, two camera perspective. So we're not going to really be utilizing this too much, but just be aware that we are working to a kind of thing where everything that is within this sort of middle horizon line here will be proportionately to scale. Everything to the top and bottom will start to get squashed, so we need to adjust accordingly when we create our animation later on. I'm just going to turn off the grid for now. So I'm just going to open up some assets I've already created. So let me just navigate to a folder. So here we have a folder of animation assets, and these are basically our two canoeists, the boat, a paddle, a background and some clouds. I could segment these more, and all I'm going to do is basically first off start off by creating my simple animation of two people in a boat sort of paddling, or the illusion of paddling. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to create another composition. So you'll find that as we work for this animation pipeline, we'll be creating quite a few compositions. And I'm just going to set this preset to be a standard HDTV 1080 25 frames, because we're actually going to have to create our animation for our canoeists as a separate composition. You'll see why a bit later, but essentially if we was to try and animate this within our main composition, it will get a little bit messy, and also we won't actually be moving the boat within its own composition. We'll be moving it using something called offset, and we'll look at that as we get to that stage. But first off, I'm just going to open up this composition. I'm just going to rename it Canoe, so I know what it is. Again, as we go along, naming things will make things easier, so we can always refer back to different compositions, because this will get quite messy quite quickly if we're not careful. And I'm just going to select all of my assets. So again, all of these assets will be made available in the description down below. And obviously, if you feel free to create your own if you wish to. And let's start off by adding our boat to our scene. I'm just going to move my boat down a little bit. So I'm just using the arrow keys on my keyboard to move it down. And I'm just going to drag my first body into my scene. So all these should be to scale proportionately. I am actually also going to increase my rendering resolution just to make it a bit clearer. So I'm just going to move this person to the sort of front kind of bow of the ship, and I want this body to be below the boat, so I want the boat to be covering up, so we kind of hide the fact that it has no feet, and we're just going to sink it down a little bit so it looks like it's sort of sitting or perching on a kind of bench. I'm then going to grab a head, and I'm going to put that below the body as well, and I'm going to move that into position again using the arrow keys, or I could drag it with my mouse if I feel confident enough to. I'm going to hold the space button to move around as I adjust and zoom in with the wheel. And what I want to do is I'm going to use the pan behind tool, or the anchor point tool, which can shortcut Y or use the actual tool at the top, and just move this anchor to be roughly where the neck would join the body. So we'll be creating pivot points, sort of these anchor points, so we can create a little bit of motion in our character. This is going to be the most rudimentary movement you'll probably ever seen. I'm also going to just move this arm to be above my body, and I'm also going to, while I'm doing this, I'm just going to move my anchor point to be roughly here, so sort of where the shoulder joint would be. and just move this roughly into a position that it looks roughly correct, like so. At this point I'm going to parent the head to the body and the arm to the body as well, and then I'm going to parent the body to the boat. So wherever the boat goes, the body will follow, wherever the body goes, the head will follow, and so on and so on, but each of these can be independently animated. I'm now going to go to my paddle, and I'm just going to drag this to be at the bottom, because this paddle actually is going to be on this side of the boat, so it's going to be at the back. I'm just going to turn transparency on so I can see it more clearly. Now, keeping the anchor point in this one in the middle, we're not actually going to be animating the paddle, we're going to be actually animating the arm and having the arm move the paddle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent this paddle by clicking on pick whip to the arm. So now if I hit R on the arm and move the rotation, you'll see that wherever the arm goes, the paddle will follow. And what I'll be doing is creating some very simple keyframes that basically has it going up and down, sort of alternating between the two canoeists. Again, this isn't going to be amazing, but the distance that the canoeists are going to be seen in the scene means it won't be too obvious. But just a little bit of movement makes it a bit more alive than them just sort of gliding around on the water. And again, the more time you spend on this sort of stuff, the better the result you can get. I'm going to now do exactly the same with my second person. Move this person into position. Again, moving the anchor point to be around where the neck would join the body. Moving the arm this time to be above everything, so this arm actually is going to be above our boat and above our person, because this paddle is going to be in front of the boat, so you have one paddle this side and one paddle at the back. I'm going to move my tool to pan behind tool to here, and then I'm going to move the arm like so, and then I'm just going to go and grab another paddle, put this above my arm, position it like so. I'm just going to move the anchor point down a little bit on this one. And now what I could do to make it look a little bit neater, so the hand actually looks like it's kind of gripping it, is I could either duplicate my arm and create a mask, but actually what I'm going to do, because again this is not going to be super tidy, so I'm just going to move the paddle below the arm but above the boat, like so. And then I'm going to basically parent the paddle to the arm, parent the arm to this second body, parent this head, second head to the body, and parent the second body to the boat. And now we've got 1 minute worth of animation that I need to start keyframing. So I'm going to keep them both in a kind of same position to begin with. In fact, I'm just going to move this paddle down a little bit because it looks a little bit on the higher side. I'm not going to be animating the paddle, but I just want them to be roughly kind of level. And I'm just going to keyframe the arms, so at the beginning and end they have the same point. So clicking this little add keyframe at the end will duplicate the position without any values changing. And I want them to sort of roughly every 10 seconds or so kind of move between these two positions here. So Control C, Control V. There we go. So again, it's not amazing. I could spend a lot longer on this. I'm doing this fairly quickly just to kind of get the general idea across. If I was to do this properly, I'd actually want the arm to go up and down and then kind of have a bit of a 3D tilt to it, because you wouldn't actually swing up and down to move. You'd actually have your arm kind of moving at an angle. But again, this isn't a tutorial on kind of advanced animation. This is just the most rudimentary motion is all we're after. There we go. So now I have my two canoeists in a boat. I'm going to select the boat itself. I'm just going to hit a line, center it to my scene, a little bit like so. And that'll do. That's literally all the animation I'm going to have for this boat. To have it moving across my screen, we're going to do something a little bit different to move it. So here I have the boat. Now I'm going to go back to my animation frame. I'm going to just add a new layer. So I'm going to add a solid. And this is going to be my water. So I'm going to go with a kind of lightish blue, I think. Like so. I'm just going to create a mask for this. Now I could have just create a shape and do it that way. And in fact, actually, I'll do it that way instead. Actually, it just gives me a little bit more control. So new shape layer, fill. Because this way I could actually add a bit of gradient in if I really wanted to. Fairly light, there we go. And just draw a rectangle. I'm not worried about it overspilling, that doesn't really matter. And I want this water to be kind of just below the midline. So let me just turn the grid on for a second. So I want this to be just below this kind of middle position here, which is where our eyes will be sort of initially drawn to. So let's say about there will be fine. Turn my grid back off. I'm now going to go to my canoe asset and drag this on top of my shape layer. And I'm going to hit S for scale. I'm just going to scale this down quite a lot. Now the reason we're scaling this down quite a lot is because when we actually view this in 360, it'll actually look a lot larger than it will in this current view. So we want things to be a lot smaller than you may expect, because they will get scaled up once we start looking at the VR 360 tools. And if I wanted to go further, I could actually, within the canoe composition, create a kind of undershadow or create a transparency of water above it. Again, I'm not going to go that far today because again I'm trying to do this fairly speedily. If I was to spend a week on this, I could get it looking amazing. I'm trying to do this within an hour or two max, really. So now I have my canoe, and what I'm going to want to have happen is I'm going to want this canoe to go across my scene. So I'm actually thinking the best way of doing this. The best way of doing this is I'm going to actually use this animation frame composition. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate. I'm going to rename my duplicate to canoe controls. And I'm going to go back to my animation frame, which I'm currently on, and just delete my canoe and shape layer. And I'm going to double click on my canoe control, which is basically a duplicate of what we just had before. And the reason I've done that is basically I'm going to want to have a composition within a composition to adjust my offset values. So we can't, if we was to try and adjust our position of our canoe like so, so we wanted this to go from left to right, and move it across, you'll notice that it actually goes off the screen. And in 360, this line here would be our stitch line, and we don't want it to actually disappear. So what we have to use is a tool called Offset. So I'm going to go to Effects and Presets, and I'm going to look for, under Distort, a tool called Offset, and I'm going to drag this onto this composition. I will be. So I'm going to drag this onto my canoe. And you see if I drag it onto my canoe layer, it's just basically allowing it to kind of continue off screen and come back on the other side, which is not exactly what I'm after. So this is why we've creating compositions within compositions, essentially. I'm going to go back to my animation frame, drag my canoe controls back into here, then drag my offset onto my canoe controls. I'm going to go back to my canoe controls, and I'm actually just going to cut this shape layer off there, go back to my animation frame and paste it back in, put this below my canoe controls. And what this will mean is, because this canoe controls here has this little layer inside, we're basically creating a composition within a composition, but we can have everything within that composition now offset to the scale of that composition, if that makes sense. So because our composition is 2x1 or 6,000 and whatever by, so hang on, yeah, 6,080 by 3,040, it will mean it will rotate it round once we apply the offset to this parented or pre-comped composition. So with this canoe controls now back inside my animation frame, I'm going to just move it to the beginning of my scene like so, and try and position it at 0. And what we have here is, you'll notice that we have our canoe split in half, and the other half appears over here. So this means that this stitch line here should be masked by the canoe kind of now rotating around itself. And we'll be using this offset value to actually move our canoe through our scene. So I'm going to hit the stopwatch on Shift Center 2 at the beginning of my composition. And go to the end, so up to 1 minute. I'm just going to move this now to 6080, which is the width of our composition. So this will now move from 0 to 6080, or from left to right across our scene, and it'll create a loop, but also it'll be eliminate any potential stitch line that we could have. And we'll be using the offset value a couple more times in this project. So what we did is we've got an animation of our canoeists just paddling their little paddles. We then put that into a composition. We then put that composition into another composition, and making sure that the composition size is the same as our 360 scene composition size will be. And now we have our little looping like so, making sure that all our composition lengths are the same as our final composition length that we desire. So in this case, 1 minute. And if any time we need to change anything, we can always click on the composition, go to Edit Composition Settings, and make sure everything here is the same as you see. Okay, so now we have our lake, we have our canoe. We now need to start adding in our other assets. So the way I've done this is in Illustrator. I created some mountains, and then I created a new project or new file in Photoshop. So let's just open up Photoshop to illustrate that point. Okay, so what I did is I created these mountains in Illustrator, just some simple paths and some fills, nothing super amazing there. And then I just used some brushes to paint in these trees, having it go darker the further away it goes, and just adding in a little image or PNG image of this little fire tower here. I've made this mountain here a little bit transparent just to kind of give that illusion of depth, so it starts to blend into the sky that we'll be adding in the After Effects. And I'm making sure it's all transparent. And this composition, this window, this sort of canvas essentially, is the same size as our After Effects file. So it's 680 by 340 pixels. And I'm making sure that everything I work in, whether it's Photoshop or Illustrator, I try and keep to the same dimensions as what my After Effects file will be. And I needed to make sure that everything I make also kind of tiles. So this edge here is a mirror of this edge here. So when we look at this in After Effects, it looks like it's seamless, although I could have done a better job there making the tree lines a bit more disguised, but anyway, here we go. So I've just put these together. I could have had these separate elements. I could have had the mountains as one file as a PNG, these trees as another PNG, and then these sort of front trees as another PNG. However, mainly because of how demanding creating a 360 animation can be on your system, I've just flattened it down like so, because the way we're viewing this won't really give much of the illusion of parallax anyway. So I've got this background I created here, and I just saved it as a PNG. I also then created a gradient sky, so this is going from the sort of night sky down to a kind of sun setting kind of orange hue. And what I will do with this is I'm actually going to use both of these elements to create the illusion of day changing to night. And I also just created a cloud one, so again these are all just using the same canvas size. And I just used a cloud brush that I found online and painted a few clouds, making sure not to add the clouds onto the edges, just to eliminate any potential stitch line issues. So I'm going back into After Effects. I'm just going to import those 3 files into my project, like so. Here we go. And I'm going to just drag my background below my water. And then I'm going to drag my background sky below everything else. And I'm going to drag my sky up a little bit so it starts with a kind of orange glow coming over the tree line. Now, I can already tell that all this is a little bit too high, so if I just turn my put my grid back on the top and show this up here, my view line will be along here. However, these mountains here will start to look distorted because they're going to start getting compressed up the top. So the way I'm going to fix that is I'm going to click on my background. So this is the mountains and the tree line. I'm going to hit scale. I'm going to turn off the proportionate scaling. I'm just going to squish this down a little bit. Just a little bit like so. There we go. And what this will do is just mean that the kind of distortion at the top won't be quite as evident as it would be, and it won't be creeping into this sort of top area here, which I want to kind of keep as a safe area, sort of, and at the bottom as well. So we want to try and keep this top and bottom clear where possible, so we don't get too much distortion going on, which can kind of ruin the effect we're after. Let's also get my clouds and drag these above everything else. And again, I'm going to hit scale and just squish these down on the vertical just to give them, again, so they don't get distorted too much when we're looking at this on the inside of the sphere. So the thing with 360 is we're always viewing stuff from within inside the sphere, so we're kind of looking from within an orb, so everything starts to get barreled and distorted as we're looking up and down. Everything within the immediate middle is proportionately to scale, basically. So now I have my elements all in there. I'm actually going to right click on my clouds and hit pre-compose. And I'm just going to call this cloud movement. Double click on my cloud movement properties, so this will create another composition which will be again 680 by 340. And the reason I'm doing this is, again, I want to do the offset, so I want to actually make it look like the clouds are moving across the sky. So I'm going to drag my offset onto my clouds within this pre-composition. I'm going to hit Shift Center at the beginning here, then I'm going to go to the end, and I'm just going to change this first value to be 0. So I want the clouds to move in the opposite direction to my canoe. In fact, I can probably make it a lot tidier by doing minus 340. There we go. So in fact, it actually does a full movement, it's full rotation. Go back to my animation frame. If I now skim along, you'll see that my clouds are moving from right to left, and my canoe is moving from left to right. So that is our simple motion done. And you'll notice that everything I'm doing at the moment is I'm working as if I was working with a traditional film or animation. At no point so far have I actually even started to look at how this would look in VR. The two reasons for that is by doing it this way, it just makes it a lot easier, and it also means we can kind of go through the pipeline in a more smooth manner. I'll show you the VR tools in a second. Once we've kind of got the core controls of animation done, we can always still go back in and refine them and adjust things afterwards. But the more you can get done kind of at this stage, and again I'm using this kind of grid as a sort of reference, I want to try and keep my focus or main points within this middle if I can, and avoid putting too much at the top or bottom, with the awareness that everything at the top and bottom will start to get pinched. Turn the grid off, there we go. And the next thing I'm going to do is I also want the sky to kind of go from light to dark, so I'm just going to do this the most simple way possible, which is going to hit P for position, start it there, go to the end, and I'm just going to move this down like so. So as time goes on, it will start to get darker, as with the gradient it starts to creep in. Another thing I like to do at this stage is I actually like to make the clouds start to reduce in opacity. So I'm going to click on my cloud movement, hit T, that's probably around 5 seconds, hit the stopwatch, then I'm going to go to the end and just reduce my opacity just a little bit because clouds aren't as apparent at night. It's not without as much light, harder to see. I could also do the same with my background. So let's say around maybe 15 seconds, I start to have my background start to become a little bit harder to see, a little bit more transparent, a bit more fading into the skyline because there's less light hitting them. So a little bit like a mist is coming in, or fog. So as the sort of sun sets, things start to be in the background start to get harder to see, a little bit more kind of misty. I could even add some little fish or animations in here, and that's our core animation kind of done. I could keep adding to this. I could add things like birds flying or fish swimming. And I'll also show you how to do the reflection in a bit. But first thing we need to do at this stage is we're now going to actually start to view this and look at how we're going to look at this within 360 or on the VR device. So in After Effects, there is actually a tool for VR compositions. It's a little bit hidden. It's not something that's kind of immediately screams out to you. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're on our main composition, which has all of our pre-compositions within it. So this is everything's within this sort of one comp here. I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to go down to the bottom, and you've got this option here called VR Comp Editor.jsk. So this is a VR composition editing tool that is within After Effects. It's come within the last few versions. It's a JavaScript plugin essentially that it comes natively with After Effects. And what you do is when you click on that, this will open up a window, which will give you two options, one for a 2D edit and one for a 3D edit. We're going to stick with a 2D edit because this is an animation. This isn't going to involve any camera movement. So I'm going to click Add 2D Edit. I'm going to make sure that my composition is set to be my main comp, so in this case, animation frame. I'm going to keep my composition width to 1920, so this will render it out as a 16:9 aspect ratio. The reason we're doing that is because this will kind of be the aspect ratio you'd see on YouTube or Facebook. But we've still got the controls to move around. I'm just going to keep the Use 2-node camera on, and I'm not going to adjust anything else. I'm going to click Add 2D Edit. And what this will do is this will take that composition and create a little series of new compositions that basically will generate a cube map that will flatten it out and start to then wrap it within a sphere. And the two windows that will open is you'll have this one here called VR Output. So this is our the one that we'll be using to sort of render out our final piece. And then we have this other one called Animation Frame VR Edit 1, which we can start to see is being distorted. If I press C on my keyboard, this brings up my camera tools, or up here, I can go to Orbit Around Cursor, and I can now click and drag around my scene. Now I can see I've already got this white line here, which I don't want, so I'm going to go back to my animation frame. I'm just going to move my water up a little bit, and in fact actually it's not the layer issue there, it's because I forgot to turn off the stroke. So let's just set the stroke to 0. There we go, now we've got that line. So if we go back to my VR edit here, that will now disappear. So what this allows us to do is it means we can go into our main composition, keep making adjustments, and then anytime we want to preview our changes, we can just go back to the animation frame here, and we can kind of get a rough sense of what the end user will see. So as you see at the top, it's pinched at the top, so as I scroll along, you see the clouds rotating. You'll see that the boat is moving around us, like it's orbiting us. And that would be the most, that's kind of the basic animation done. Now if I want to kind of take this a step further and start looking at reflections, this is where things get a little bit more complex. So I'm actually going to show two different ways of doing that. One which is using a plugin, which sadly is not free, and another one which will be looking at just taking the composition, flipping it, then reversing it, and applying it as a kind of blend mode, essentially, kind of adjustment, like an add essentially to our scene. So I'll show you the two ways in the next videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.